Welcome to the Bottom Line Podcast with Nicholas Kuzmich, where we discuss what matters most, the bottom line, featuring the top minds in their industry. Now, let's get started.
Hey everybody, Nicholas Kuzmich here, host of the Bottom Line Podcast, where I connect with industry leaders to discuss what matters most. And that is the bottom line. Now, that doesn't just mean bottom line profits. I know we're all business folks here and that's important, but really what matters most in terms of the life and the thoughts and the beliefs of the individuals that we speak with. So past guests include people like Scott Berman, founder of Sky Cave Dark Retreats, Paula Telfer, the founder of Sensei, and so many more, all of which you can listen to wherever you listen to podcasts or watch them. This episode, like all of them, brought to you by H2H Media Group. That's a company that I founded where we help premium businesses get qualified leads without funnels. And we've generated close to $1 billion in revenue over the last 2 decades. If you want to learn more, go to nicholaskuzmich.com. But I want to jump right into it. Dr. Manesh Girn, thank you for joining the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to chat with you.
Now, I could obviously read off your wiki bio and what's on the website and what's on your IG. I think that's a little impersonal. So I want to turn it to you and let you do the hard work. And if you had to do an elevator pitch, and that elevator pitch could be 8 seconds or 8 minutes, because however you answer it, I think will lead to a bunch of cool questions. If someone were like, hey man, what do you do? And what's your company? How would you answer that?
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are a variety of ways I can answer
Right?
that.
Yeah.
But, at its core, I'm just a massive nerd that is fascinated about consciousness in both the personal context of my own growth, my own journey, but then also scientifically, academically. And so that kind of interest, mainly originating on the personal side, led me to be interested in psychology and neuroscience and philosophy, which, one step after another got me into some brain imaging research labs. And currently I work as a postdoctoral researcher at the University of California, San Francisco, where I do brain imaging research on psilocybin and on psychedelic drugs more generally. So
Yeah.
understanding how psychedelics work in the brain, how that relates to alterations of consciousness, as well as healing and transformation, and things like creativity and the human potential more generally.
Yeah, I love that. And here's why I'm excited about this call, because I know we met a few months ago. And what really turned me on to you and your work was, yes, you have the personal side of it, and you've had personal journeys and experiences, and which is very different from most of the other doctors and PhDs I know. Like they study it well, but they're like, hell no, I ain't touching any of this. But also you substantiate everything that we talk about with actual research. Whereas, some in the woo clan, if you will, are just like, oh, I feel this way, but I have no idea what's happening. So I'm super stoked about this conversation and where it can go. I know you touched on a couple things. One thing I do though is, so a good friend of mine, Jason Gaynard, founder of Mastermind Talks, says every good conversation is the result of good questions. And so he created this conversation deck because he believes you ask good questions, you get good answers. I usually start the podcast by pulling a random question out from the deck and
Cool.
asking to you, are you okay if we do that today?
Yeah, totally. Let's do it.
Okay. Okay, okay. So here's the deck. It says, this is interesting. I actually want to hear how you respond to it. Where has luck played a significant role in your life, if any? Do you believe in luck? Is luck such a thing? Can it be measured? How would you answer the question about how luck might have played a significant role in your life? Because I know, I don't want to tee it up, but I know some of the situations that led to you working with various people and opening up other doors. I don't know if you'd see that as luck or something else, but how would you answer that?
Yeah, it's interesting. You could frame it as luck, but you can also frame it as synchronicity and the
Yes.
universe acting in your favor, right? Like those are
Yes.
kind of the same things. And so I often like to think like the universe is always conspiring in my favor. It's going to show me what I need to see at the right time, bring me the right people.
Yeah.
And this has been reflected in my journey as well. Like I've been very lucky to meet the right mentors, the right people at the right time to connect me to where I need to go. And so along my journey, I just really, I'm really blessed to have met the right people at the right time to direct me in ways and wouldn't be where I am without that.
Now, here's an odd thing that I would just love your perspective on. Some people say luck. Some might, Dispenza might call it manifestation or attraction or whatever. And I would actually love to talk about your thoughts on that maybe a little bit later. But this idea that, yes, the universe conspires in our favor, I think many people hold that. I guess a greater question is coming from someone who is experienced in consciousness and studied some of the traditions, as well as experienced in the science of it, can one actually help orchestrate luck or
Mm.
manifestation or whatever these various, or is it just that the universe is unfolding as it may and our brain works in certain ways like cognitive bias to identify the things we want to identify and not the other way? Like where does Dr. Manish stand on that?
Yeah, yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, okay, we can talk about the science angle, then like maybe the more open angle, the
Sure.
curious angle. The science angle is that if we're clear on what we want and we have clear goals in mind and intentions, it filters our attention in a particular way. We're going to notice things we don't usually notice. We're going to find patterns that we wouldn't pick up otherwise.
Yeah.
And I think through the openness that that cultivates and the kind of attentional awareness, we'll notice opportunities we wouldn't notice otherwise. And so we'll think like, oh, this person, something about them was, aligned with my interests. I should follow up on that, or I
Mm,
should follow this thread. And so
mm.
I think just having your own internal clarity and alignment with yourself, through like completely non-mysterious means can help you open up and have these experiences. And then on the mysterious side,
Yes.
somehow, this is a whole kind of worms I can open up here in terms of the nature of reality, right? But at the end of the day, we experience the world through our experience, right? We don't experience objective reality. Everything's subjective.
Right.
There's no such thing as objective reality. There's intersubjective that we create consensus on what we all perceive, but it's like it's all experience within consciousness.
Mm,
And from that perspective, we are that consciousness. It's not distinct from us. We are, consciousness experiencing itself.
right.
From that way, I think with the power of intention and the mind, you're somehow structuring a reality tunnel. And in some ways we don't fully understand, the universe responds to your energetic dynamics internally.
Yeah.
And so it's like we all have the experience of, oh, I just thought about this person for the first time in years, then they call us and text us. Or we get the sense like, oh, I should call this person. Might be something wrong with them, and they just had a car accident or something. Stuff like this happens all the time. And
Yeah.
so I think things are mysteriously connected in ways we don't fully understand. And I think the energy you hold within yourself somehow filters out and affects things that happen to you
I
in
love
some way.
that. That makes I love hearing your perspective on it because literally you're seeing both sides being explained in that way. Is and I know this is not your specialty, but your just take on is quantum understandings, quantum science, physics, all the rest of that, and the progression it's made a close attempt at bringing some form of explanation to what we would deem as mystical, mysterious. Like, is there some substantial evidence that we can actually put data to some of the things that are happening, or is that still just a little too far out there, not yet received as a real form of study?
A bit of both. It depends on who you ask, right? Because
Sure.
frontier quantum physics is multiple competing perspectives. And, there's string theory, there's alternatives to that. There's like, based on the math alone, it doesn't determine one particular interpretation of the
Yeah,
nature
right.
of the bottom level. However, since there is that openness, and since we get like things like action at a distance and non-locality and the observer effect, and these things that don't make sense within the kind of more basic, Newtonian Bilbo, cause and effect universe, the causal universe we usually expect to be the case. Uh,
Yeah,
Quantum physics suggests that that's not the full story, and so it opens the door for these things to potentially be possible. But then how exactly that plays out is, I'm not a physicist, I'm not going to
sure.
pretend to,
Yeah.
but I think there is, I think, possibility of explaining these things through there more than most places.
Yeah, fascinating. So you are a PhD doctor in neuroscience, but, and correct me if I'm wrong, I just want to make sure that the details are specific with a focus on like psychedelics and how that affects brain and whatnot. I know over the last several years, more and more people, I mean, I know there's a small cohort of you, but more and more people are opened up to the idea of at least what psychedelics does for variations of maybe this is not the right medical term, but like trauma, right? There's depression, anxiety, healing, all these things. And there's a big field of study now moving in that space. How does one who, if my story's correct, you're Canadian to
Mhm.
start, had a love for studying, was good at it, started studying brain. Somehow psychedelics got in the mix, and now this is your specialty. Like, what's the short form story of how you specialize in this field at that level?
Yeah, totally. So was interested in psychedelics since I was a teenager. Had my first experience when I was 17 around there, and I decided that around the age of 19 or 20, like, hey, psychedelics are fascinating. They
Hmm.
bridge together so many different things that I'm interested in, from spirituality and religion to anthropology to neuroscience to psychology to philosophy. It's like I want to do this. And part of it was, again, meeting the right people at the right time, but also
Sure.
just like being proactive. And so before I started graduate school, when I was still an undergraduate at UBC in Vancouver,
Yeah.
I, I knew one of the top researchers in the world was in London, at the Imperial College London. He was doing pioneering work on psychedelic brain imaging. And so I was like, I want to get connected to this dude, right? Like,
Yeah.
how do I get on his radar?
Yeah.
And so I was working in a cognitive neuroscience lab at UBC at the time as a volunteer. And I was like racking my brain. It's like, how can I link what we're doing here to something that he's doing to create that connection? And actually, I ended up writing a paper proposal that links our models of different types of thinking and stuff that we're developing in our lab. And I emailed him and CC'd my supervisor at UBC. It's like, hey, I'm working with this researcher at UBC. Would you be interested in doing this paper together? And I ended up publishing a paper with him, with
That's
me as the
wild.
lead author, and before I started grad school. And that just created this relationship between me and him. And now I work with him here at UCSF, and he's like one of the world's leading researchers in the area.
Yeah,
So,
it's a wild story. Like if the people don't know who you're talking about, I know you're talking about Robin Carter Harris. Um, like they, if you're not in the world, you don't know, but if you are in the world, you recognize that, he's one of the leading guys in this space. And the fact that the serendipitous experiences of how you now work there together, leading the charge on everything that's happening here is pretty phenomenal. So obviously there's going to be two people listening to this. There's the people who are new to the space altogether. Maybe we start there before we get into the other stuff.
mhm.
New to the space altogether. And they're like, drugs are bad. This is your brain on drugs. Like it's stuck in, the old rhetoric of watch out, you'll go insane. If you take a hit of acid, you'll jump off a building and you'll see things along the way and so on and so
Mhm.
forth. In your opinion, having been a PhD, a doctor who studies this stuff, who studies the brain intelligently and knows, what should someone's perspective who may not know this world be on the potential role that psychedelics can play in someone's everyday life?
Mm.
What I mean by that is not someone who consumes it every day and goes on a big trip every day, but like, are you of the belief on some level that this should be a part of everyone's life on some level, on some people's life? Why or why not? Like, speak to the
Yeah.
person who this is just totally new to for a sec.
Yeah, totally. I mean, psychedelics are a really unique class of drugs, right? They're not stimulants, they're not depressants, they don't like reduce your anxiety in a reliable way. But what they do is they induce this profound experience.
Mm,
And and that's why they come with a lot of risks because that could put you in a very sensitive and open state. But
sure.
when harnessed in the right way, the right preparation, right context, kind of how the research is conducted, how therapy with psychedelics is conducted, there's a lot of potential there for people to gain insight into themselves and emerge with a new perspective on their lives. And I think, I'm not saying everybody should do it. Some people might not be ready for that
Sure.
experience. It's really intense. It can challenge a lot of things. It can bring up a lot of emotion and memories and traumas that we hadn't processed. But I think in general, why people are excited about psychedelics scientifically, and in like medical context is they kind of enable this flexibility and plasticity of our mind and brain
Right.
that helps change how we think. And so a lot of people, once they get into their 30s, 40s, are like, oh, I am how I am. I've been kind of pissed off and, depressed most of my life. I'm just a grumpy person or, whatever. And psychedelics show the possibility of, no, your brain and mind are able to change like in a remarkable way, such that you're able to live with more presence, with more joy, with more self-awareness, and all these things. And so I think psychedelics can really help a lot of people break out of little mental prisons they've created for themselves and be more expansive.
And how would you dress? Because I mean, I'm obviously have the same experiences, and I'm a very big advocate for the right person. There's some people who might just say, but I could get that meditating or breath work or going on the treadmill every day or eating healthy and getting the right supplements, which is true. Um, but are we talking various degrees of what this can do? Can you hit the same levels doing different things, or do you categorize psychedelics either in a category of its own, or that it's faster, or that it's easier to accomplish the plasticity, the new states, the rewiring stuff than other things, or is it just another thing amongst other things as a consideration?
Yeah, I think when used in the right way, when all the precautions taken into account, it could be a faster way to do it and potentially easier in that it's like a short, intense, potentially challenging experience, but that's, 6 to 8 hours of intensity and you get, months worth of
Sure.
therapy or meditation in that potentially in terms of insight and processing emotions and memories and all of these kinds of things. And so I think it's really a complement to all those things. There's even research specifically on it, synergizing with meditation,
Mm,
and these other things. So it's not an either or thing. And for me, I'm a very open and curious person. I like to try a variety of different things.
right.
So it's like, yes, I'm a daily meditator. I have been since I was a teenager. That's a big part of my life. And I do all sorts of stuff that's not psychedelic related for my own
Right.
growth. But putting psychedelics into the mix is just the catalyst for so much more and can speed up your process that's already happening. So somebody can never do a psychedelic and still grow and develop as a person in beautiful ways. But it's like we have this powerful tool that could be used. Why wouldn't you want to try using it?
Right.
You know?
Right. Um, I know a lot of what you talk about, and then this is just we'll segue into some of the specific work you do. But again, just kind of talking to a lot of the research has been done around what is known as a peak experience, right? A higher dose of a particular compound, it takes you into a peak experience, and a lot of the benefit is generated from that peak experience. Do you have opinions, whether like documented or not, based on any sort of research on anything other than that? So what I mean by that is like you have the peak experience on one end, you have microdosing on the other end, whatever the research shows on that, and then what feels like a spectrum in between
Hmm.
of so for example, my wife and I will do something that we call couples therapy once a month. And that is with either the use of MDMA or 3-MMC, low dose, not high. Um, and what it does, it kind of like breaks down all of our crusts around our heart. There's no more judgment. We're able to speak freely with each other. And over time of doing this for several years, now we've been able to carry that over into our everyday life where we don't have to wait for our heart to be opened up before we can share certain things. Now we're just like, hey, babe, I like the way you said that. I didn't feel so great. And she doesn't automatically defend now. It's like, oh, I get you. So I feel like, and I don't know if there's any studies on this, but there's like the spectrum between microdosing and peak experiences and a spectrum in between. Do you know of any research or anecdotal experience yourself that suggests other potential uses of some of these compounds outside what might deem as a therapeutic peak psychedelic
Yeah.
experience?
I think this is really underexplored in the research because it often is that you're either on like the high or low dose side. But
Right.
I think, peak experiences in terms of like having this mystical oneness or ego death and losing control and going into some other realm, that's not necessarily needed to get better or to have insight, right? Sometimes
Mm,
you might just need to be able to think about your problems in a new way. Or you
mm,
might need to like kind of open the defenses a bit to let emotions come out. And you don't
right.
need to necessarily take, 4 or 5 grams of mushrooms to get there, right? You could take one or two, or take one and go on a hike or something.
Right.
There's a lot of things that could be very insightful and meaningful and useful for people in between. And that's something I do quite often as well. Like taking a gram, going on a hike is one of my favorite things, or even
Right.
half a gram, and be profoundly helpful. And so I think this is something research needs to get into, but
Got it.
like we're very much in our infancy, and there's a lot more to look into.
Yeah, I know. I'm particularly trying to like, I see various compounds as like tools in a toolbox, and I'm trying to explore personally, not for the world, but for me, like what tool at what dose for what application,
Hmm.
makes the most sense. And so things like low dose ketamine, great for breath work, like takes me on a very deep, great breath work experience. To your point, lower dose mesodoses of psilocybin for learning, for example, like taking a hike and pondering, or if I'm like trying to get some deep insight from a book that like goes over my head mentally, but then if I can reread it in a different context, all of a sudden it's like it's vibrating your cells and you're like, oh my God, I get this now. I didn't get it
Right.
before. So it is a fascinating space. I think that's a great segue to lead into this idea of, I got into the space with a healing mindset of like, oh, there's stuff I need to work through and whatnot. And then, did a lot of years of that. And that never ends. Don't get me wrong. That goes forever. But beyond that, it started saying like, well, what are the other applications? Like human potential, but inflammation, I know you talk about a little bit. You're working right now in the brain health space with some UFC fighters and brain injury and what that does.
Hmm.
So a lot of people are looking at psychedelics from the metaphysics aspect and standpoint, which is substantial, and I love that, or from a trauma healing standpoint. But could you go wherever you want to go with this, and I might have some follow-up questions, but if we're talking about human potential, if we're talking about inflammation, if we're talking about brain injury and what you're doing with the UFC fighters, if you're like, what else are we kind of missing? Because it seems like a psychedelic compound is not a one-trick pony, that there's some pretty amazing benefits all around for it. What is some of your like latest research showing there?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, so something I like to emphasize a lot is that psychedelics are, on one side, experiential medicines, as we know. They induce a profound experience, but they also do a lot of stuff behind the scenes for our brain.
I love that.
And you alluded to this, like the inflammation. People don't know this. Like, psychedelics are potent anti-inflammatories, not just in the brain, throughout the entire body.
Wow.
And I was just at an event last night with a bunch of like the VIPs in the psychedelic space in the Bay Area, and there was this very well-known researcher there who pioneered psychedelics for anti-inflammatory effects. And his research, he found that psilocybin blocked the development of asthma in rodents.
Wow.
It's inhibited lung inflammation. So you
Wow.
would never expect that with a psychedelic, right?
Right.
And so there's a lot of implications that has for arthritis and for autoimmune conditions, and a variety of other conditions because inflammation is really central to a lot of things.
Right. And
Um,
in context, would this be someone, if they wanted to get the benefits of that, are we talking like micro, meso, big, like where would they start to see some of these kind of benefits?
The research, at least the rodent research, suggests that even low doses can be really strongly anti-inflammatory. So
Wow.
microdosing, a few times a week can help with things like arthritis. I'm quite
Fascinating.
sure it does, and we need research on that. But
Yeah.
everything points to its ability to do that. Um, and so, I mean, more generally, I think psychedelics are useful much beyond mental health. And mental health is just the framing we've put on them
Right.
because you know,
To get laws passed.
right, let's get laws passed, but also because mental health is such a crisis these days.
Yes.
So it's
Right.
like something
Right.
to easy to get behind and provide money for. Because it's always like, where is the capital? Where's the money going to go to?
Sure.
Okay, mental health is a huge public health issue, right? And costs a lot of money. But I think that's kind of a historical contingency that we focus on it as mental health. It can also be used for connecting with greater meaning in our life, connecting with
Yeah.
nature, deepening our relationships, having more self-awareness and growing beyond just being quote unquote healthy, having better brain health that allows us to preserve our cognitive function into old age or recover from injuries. It could do all these things, and research is starting to look at that, but we're still in a really early stages, mostly because it's just not getting funded enough yet.
Right.
But hopefully that'll change.
And what are you finding on like the brain injury side? So like, I mean, it's one thing to say someone's had a brain injury. You're dealing with combat fighters, for example. Like, what are you just noticing on its capability to help on that side of things?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I mean, it's good for them while they're fighting, like in the terms of before and after their fights,
Yeah.
because it's neuroprotective. It
Ah,
actually protects neurons against
interesting.
damage in the moment, right? And there's interesting studies with, I know you're into 5-MeO DMT,
Right.
and there's been studies where they deprived brain cells of oxygen and found that they survived for longer when DMT, when 5-MeO was present.
Wow.
Literally helps preserve neuronal function in the absence of oxygen. And that's quite fascinating, right? And
That's
so,
huge. Yeah.
and that's just like that's a neuroprotective effect. And so I think while they're fighting, they're taking blows to the head. These things, even like subconcussive blows over
Right.
time, can lead to all sorts of things.
Right.
So it's helpful for that. And then also afterwards, in terms of just long-term brain health, preserving your cognitive function, preventing that snowball cascade that leads to things like Alzheimer's and dementia.
Mm.
Um, and because it's anti-inflammatory, pro-neuroplasticity, it helps mitochondrial metabolic function as well. It does all these things. So.
As amazing. So, are we saying that maybe the next time we watch a UFC fight night and some guy's tripping balls while he's fighting, you might have been in his corner before that?
Yeah, he's like that wasn't a microdose. That was too high. Yeah, pretty much.
Although there was interesting studies that I found that like meso or microdosing on LSD increases strength. I don't know, but I was like, I'm going to try this before a workout. And again, it could be 100% placebo. I don't know, but I was like, I track my weights. I track what I push. I felt like that workout was heavier, but easier for me. I don't know, but it seems like there's some crazy applications for the whole thing.
Yeah, I agree. And that could be a real thing. It could be helping with the mind-muscle connection and allowing
Huh.
you to tune in a bit more. And there's some evidence suggesting that could be the case. And so it
So
can very well
fascinating.
be possible. Yeah.
Well, so another thing, and this is really what lights me up, and I'm glad we get to talk about this, is like you've created a course on how to rewire your brain with psychedelics.
Hmm.
The reason why this lights me up so much, and we built a protocol around it and everything, and like really shifting our life to point in this direction. And maybe this is just my narrative, but like my narrative hypothesis is we are the byproduct of narratives that were fed to us in one way or another through experiences, through authority, through this, that, the other. Some pass through us, which is how I think they're supposed to go. Some stuck. And as they stuck over time, I think an example that you give oftentimes is like the ski tracks on freshly snow. You repeat it
Hmm.
over and over and over. Now they become a part of our identity. And all of a sudden they're filtering how we go through life. And
Hmm.
so it might be extreme to say, but there could be some ideas that suggest everything that we do, our money making potential, our relationship potential, all this is in some way, shape, or form colored or affected by these constructs. And then I guess, and you'll put me in my place here if I'm wrong with the languaging. Like, yes, a lot of that is mind or whatever, but a lot of that is brain in that it's just actual neurons and things and firing in certain directions. And so my thought was, well, if that's the case, and you have alluded to this before, if can you teach an old dog new tricks? And I think
Right.
the answer is yes. Is it
Yeah.
easy? Maybe not as easy as people thought, but there are ways to do it.
Hmm.
And at least my minimal research has showed that psychedelics is a great accelerator of that, more than potentially the incantations or affirmations or some of these other things. You have a whole course, on how to rewire your brain with psychedelics without giving the whole thing away, obviously. Can you talk us through like what that actually means and practical things that people can do in considering, yeah, geez, I would love to rewire my brain to hold on to thoughts and stuff that serve me rather than harm me.
Yeah, the place I want to start with this is that our neuroplastic potential in our brain does persist throughout the lifespan. A lot of people, believe it ends when we're 25 or something like this.
Right.
There's a lot of research that our brain retains neuroplasticity throughout the lifespan. However, it's not the same for everybody, and there are a
Mm,
lot of things we can do to support it outside of psychedelics. In some way, the extent to which our brain is plastic is a marker of our overall health.
got
And
it.
um, and
That's a
so I
great
think
point.
in this course, and something I like to say a lot is like, you want to get your lifestyle in check and optimized to then best give your brain the ability to be plastic with or without psychedelics, right? And so these are things like avoiding processed foods, which can be inflammatory in the body. It means exercising. Zone two, kind of sustained cardio, is really good for your brain health, for BDNF, for stimulating neuroplasticity.
Right.
A lot of supplements you could take, whether it's lion's mane or omega-3s, or like a whole set of things. People who are older can take an NAD supplement for their metabolic
Mm,
health, which makes a difference. Um, and sleep, having 7 to 9 hours of sleep and like good quality sleep with good nighttime hygiene is really important. All that really supports psychedelics, which themselves will boost
right.
neuroplasticity in a way that can last up to 30 days plus. And particularly that first about 7 to 2 hours, your brain is particularly able to take on new habits and
Mm,
unlearn old ones. And so in the course, I'm talking a lot about how to really optimize what you're doing during that neuroplastic window, how to best support yourself before and after that. and just the importance of taking consistent actions.
Sure.
Because in the brain, what gets hardwired is what's consistent, right? And so it's like you have to, if you want to encode a new habit, and we all know this, you got to do it over and over again. If you fall off, get right back into it right
Right.
away. And so in the course, I just talk about different ways to support that and kind of how to get the most out of your psychedelic journeys and create lasting change.
I love that. Can you, because like, I think a lot of people live with some form of illusion that it's the experience and that's it. Like it's the 4 to 6 hours if I'm doing psilocybin, or 20 minutes if it's 5-MeO or whatever, but it's the experience, and whatever happens during the experience is what happens. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about integration, but what I love, what you bring to the table is not just integration, but it's, hey, during this plastic window, here are considerations to be made. Because correct me if I'm wrong, if nothing is done in those windows, it sounds like the glue rehardens or the cement rehardens back into all the things you were trying to dump and get rid of in the first place. Without going into too many specifics, like what is, because that's the question that everyone gets. It's okay, I've had this experience. They don't know, but like, okay, 3 days after, I have a 72-hour window to really do something here. What are one or two things that people should be doing or considering in that prime window of opportunity post experience?
Yeah, I think, well, one, it's really important to take time for yourself and not jump straight back into your routine
Right.
and busyness of life. It's to be in stillness, be mindful of what content you're consuming,
Right.
avoid being in like hyper stimulated environments with lots of people. Because also we're more socially imprintable at that point.
Mm.
What you really want to do is um, think of what your ideal day looks like and try to implement that. It's
Oh,
like
I
the
love
next
that.
morning, wake up early if you can, get a good night's rest, wake up early, meditate, journal, and just like if I had my ideal
Oh,
highest self day, do that the next 3 days if you can,
great advice.
next rest of your life if you can, right? But
Yeah,
like that
right.
next couple of days is really valuable to help encode that in a deeper way.
Mm. Um, Slightly off topic, but I think I saw you do some, or maybe it wasn't you doing the study, but you were commenting on a study with psychedelics and AI.
Right. Yeah, I think I know what you're referring to. Yeah.
Do you like this? I mean, I know this is kind of off topic. We're going to get back on topic, but I just thought like, oh, so wait a second here. Well, can you explain what whoever did and however they did it, and maybe what some of those implications mean either to AI or to us, frankly?
Right, yeah. So there's a lot there. So I mean, what you're referring to is this Instagram post that actually went semi-viral. I got like
Yeah.
200K views on this. And it was me summarizing a research paper by some of my friends like slash colleagues. And what they did was they had this AI model, like a language learning model, like ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Except it was connecting, it had visual inputs like images and then text and a way of relating them, right? It's like just like giving a concept to visual images.
Right.
And what they did was they kind of changed the model so that the link between words and images was kind of blurred. And then the model started talking as if it was tripping. It was kind of saying how everything is blending into each other. Everything is kind of unified in this unified
Ah,
field. The
so
conceptual
wild.
distinctions were lost. And it was showing a lot of behavior that was like textually similar to people reporting on their ego death experiences with psychedelics.
Crazy.
And so it was this point, this idea that one of the aspects of the psychedelic experience that might be central is a breakdown of our kind of conceptual discursive thinking that separates the world into these abstractions and concepts. And I mean, to try to bridge the implications of that, it's kind of like we often get stuck in our concepts, right? We take the map for the territory, we
Right.
live in terms of our intellectual understanding of things as opposed to the felt experience. And
Right.
in the realm of experience, there are no distinctions. It's just experience. Mind
Yeah.
takes
Good
distinction.
point.
Yeah.
Right.
And so this is something we're finding by manipulating this AI model, which is really cool.
Yeah. That's so wild. Do you mind talking a little bit about, because for those experienced or those unexperienced, like I think in everything in life, everyone has their bias in terms of, oh, I like this compound over this compound for this reason or whatever. has the research shown, and I will say I'd love to just in a particular interest because we work with 5-MeO, and I know that it also has an effect on the 1A receptors and not just the 2A and what that means for
Right.
people. But um, does the research show distinctions between, let's call it the various more known psychedelics? I know there's a big list of whatnot. Like, do any? I guess what I'm trying to ask is, do any jump out at you as more potential than others, or would you use certain ones in certain use cases over others, and why? Just if someone's trying to navigate this space, there's choices and options and a million and one things, and there's even the considerations of ceremonial aspects if you're going to go to Peru and have an ayahuasca experience versus smoking a pipe that has an NDMT that's synthetically made. Like, there's just so much there,
Mhm.
but does research show any clear distinctions between compounds and what that might, like, any conclusions that you might find from that?
Yeah, it's a really important question. And the short answer is no, research isn't there yet. Research is
Mm,
just kind of treating all psychedelics like they're the same. And it's like, oh,
interesting.
psychedelics help with depression. And even though that's ayahuasca and psilocybin mainly, and 5-MeO is some research on that. But it's like, oh, they're all just psychedelics. Even
Mm,
though, as you kind of mentioned, they're mechanistically different. There are important differences in their brain effects. Although experientially, there's a lot more overlap than not
sure.
in those cases. If I were to draw some distinctions just based on, what I've heard in the biology, I think LSD is better for more cognitive
Right.
experiences. Like there's more lucidity
Yes.
mentally. You might be more able to interact with other people. You might be able to think about more abstract problems and things like this. And so for that kind of cognitive processing, LSD. I find for like an introspective journey where you're going within yourself, psilocybin mushrooms is often the best way. That's more of a like I imagine lying down on your couch or like just going inside. Sorry, psilocybin is much more conducive to that.
And would you go as far to say, because like there's a lot of people who say they've tripped on mushrooms, and then there's other people who, again, in a therapeutic context, you're talking about a playlist and an eye mask to force the internal introspection. Uh, what value do you put on that type of stuff in that type of scenario?
Yeah, I think it's a powerful one. I mean, me personally, I've done some psilocybin mushrooms probably like, I don't know, like 30 to 50, 40 to 50 times over my life, going back to, I was like 18 or 17. And the majority of the time, it's like me and some friends in a comfortable space, lying down next to each other, mostly going internal and then interacting afterwards. So
Right.
it's always been more of an introspective journey, and that's what they do in the research, as you said as well.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, if your intention is to process memories and emotions and go and get new insight, in some ways, the external world can be a bit of a distraction. It can be
Right.
easy to avoid what's difficult and this look outside.
Right.
And
Right.
some people do that. Some people in therapy were like, "Oh, I don't want to wear these ice shapes. I want to get up and walk around." But then we often encourage them, like, "No, like that impulse is
Is
an
a
avoidance
distraction.
mechanism." Yeah.
Yes.
So it's
Right.
like sit with it. Um,
Right.
that said, being in nature, being in other environments can also be profoundly like insightful as well. So. It's really, it's different for each person and their intention, but it's like at the end of the day, it's just being honest with yourself on why you want to do what you want to do.
And then any other thoughts? Like, I know there's some research on iboga and addictions, for example. I know you touched
Yeah.
on psilocybin and LSD. There's iboga. There's ketamine, obviously used heavily in the depression circles, if you will.
Yeah.
Um, is there any other just thoughts or insights you have on use cases for the various types of compounds out there?
Yeah, so that's a good point. Like ibogaine or iboga is really seems to be really effective for addiction, particularly opioid addictions, and it
Right,
helps
right.
people kind of seem to cut that addiction while also having minimal withdrawal effects,
Yeah,
which is the astonishing thing.
right.
Because withdrawal, you can die from heroin withdrawal, right? It's very intense and very difficult, and that's one of the hardest reasons, one of the main reasons people have a hard time quitting. But it seems to help them go through that without the withdrawal. So I think ibogaine for that is really powerful. There are kind of risks related to the heart with ibogaine, so that's like a whole topic on how to manage that and be careful around that.
Of course.
And you know, kind of anecdotally, a lot of people find ayahuasca really helpful for more deep trauma or even ancestral, intergenerational trauma, things that might have been passed down. That's often the theme with ayahuasca for whatever
Hmm.
reason for people. And I know the other psychedelics can do that too, but people bring that up for things
Hmm.
like depression, anxiety, or trauma contributes to like a lot of things,
Of
right?
course.
Most mental health conditions. And then yeah, ketamine is used. It's the one that's legally available right now. It's specifically for depression. It also can be effective for short-term release from chronic pain and anxiety.
Mm, right.
And then five is an interesting one.
Yeah, I
Five
would love to
is
talk
really
about it just a
powerful.
little bit. Obviously, I've got a
Yeah,
bias there.
yeah.
But like we know anecdotally what we know from facilitating these experiences. I would love your insight on what you know about it from the research and like what's happening.
Yeah, so I mean, 5-MeO is interesting because as you kind of mentioned, it works slightly different in terms of the receptors. And it's different than the other psychedelics in that usually it doesn't have much content, right? It's kind of just like pure white light, unity, non-dual consciousness, right? I'm sure, as you're well aware. And as opposed to seeing entities and
Right.
having visions, some people do have that apparently, which I found really interesting, but most, like 90% of people don't. And so it's quite different in that it just takes people almost fully out of themselves temporarily, and then
Right.
it reboots your system. And that whole thing can be really effective for shaking people out of a depression, reducing anxiety, making them more embodied, and all these things. And from the research perspective, there are a couple preliminary trials on five for depression
Hmm.
that have found that to be quite effective. And the interesting thing is five, it only lasts, let's say, I don't know, 15 minutes and then slowly trails off. Studies have found that from one 15-minute experience or one dose, there were neuroplastic changes 30 days plus, similar to psilocybin.
Wow. Yeah. Huge.
So some people are concerned, like, oh, it's so short. Does it really last as long as psilocybin? But there's some evidence that it does, which is itself kind of astonishing. And so there's that, and in addition to the neuroprotective effects, as well, that might be more than psilocybin potentially, as well as
Interesting.
it induces neurogenesis, in addition to neuroplasticity, which is also a unique effect.
Yeah. Well, I love it. I thanks for helping substantiate some of that stuff. It's funny. The vast majority of the people who have an experience are, especially, and we titrate the dose in an experience with us. So, you work it up. I remember particularly, this is the first time we saw this happen specifically. And in the short time we have left here, is there any research that because five on top of everything you mentioned is also a somatic experience. Like people have a very visceral, physical, whether it's shaking, laughing, crying, moving,
Hmm.
involuntary movements of the body, whether they're conscious or not, or aware or not. Is there studies showing what's actually happening there? Is it some levels of trauma release with the idea of like body keeps a score and now it's letting some of that go? Do you know what might be happening on that level?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We don't know for sure scientifically, but I think it is something, as you said, like bodily releases of trauma or pent-up energy in the nervous system and muscles is coming out.
Hmm.
Because it puts you, I think this is a serotonin 1A receptor, which is an inhibitory receptor. It reduces activity in certain areas.
Hmm.
It might kind of reduce certain, you could say, defenses or checks and balances on regulating our muscles in our body, such that we're in this like really relaxed, kind of like warm blanket embodied state, right? And that just like opens the door for anything to move through.
To let go.
So
Yeah.
that's how I think about it.
Yeah, we had this one girl come through uh, out and she's spinning her arms like this, unaware, and
Mm,
then wakes up and realizes she's like talking to us, what is going on? My arms are going this way. And we're like, don't just go with it. Don't worry about it. Um, and then it's funny, not funny, that's the wrong descriptor. But after, when we were talking through the integration portion of it, after post experience, she's like, yeah, in the experience as I was coming to, I felt my arms spinning and I saw the colors like blue, orange, and red.
mm,
And I'm like, let's not try to find meaning. Let's allow meaning to arrive rather than searching for it. And then as we're just talking, boom, it hit her. She said, oh my God. I said, what? She goes, it just came to me. Um, 6 or 7 years ago, she actually got hit by an 18-wheel tractor trailer.
Oh, wow.
Didn't even think about that this would have an effect on her life or
Right.
whatever. But she said, as my eyes were closed, I was seeing circles. The circles were the tires. And for some reason, my body was responding. And the
Mm.
blue, yellow, and red, or whatever color she saw, was actually the logo of the truck beside it as it was sliding into her.
Wow.
And she said, I never thought, like, she wasn't badly hurt, but she's like, I never thought that this actually was carrying any residual effect on my day-to-day life. Apparently it was, she says. And now I'm like released from a lot of the fear and anxiety that she couldn't explain why it was there. So it's
That's
fascinating
fascinating.
that you said that sometimes maybe not at a peak dose, but what we'd call a mig dose or a hug, you do get some of that and you get some weird body somatic responses that make sense after the fact and just
Yeah,
release stuff whether you're aware of it or not. So fascinating
it's
there.
really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Manish, I know we're wrapping up on time here. You do some great stuff. I know you've got an Instagram thing where you put a lot of content out. You've got the course out. You've got a bunch of stuff going on. Where is the best place people can find your work, follow your work, get engaged with your work, and all of that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So, as you kind of said on Instagram and YouTube, I have a page called The Psychedelic Scientist.
I love it.
And, I've been on and off with making content, which is a lot of evergreen stuff on there, and I'm looking to get back into it soon for content at the intersection of psychedelics, neuroscience, and mental health. And in addition, people can find me on LinkedIn, just Manesh Girn. And also I have a website, maneshgirn.com. And on the website, you can access and see the courses that I have. I have two courses as
Perfect.
well. And you can contact me through any of these mediums.
I love that. So, two final questions, how I like to end all podcasts. One is completely unrelated. This is half selfishly, and then a lot of people just like to know what people are buying and doing. What's the best purchase you made in the last 12 months, irregardless of price point, big or small,
Right, that's an interesting question. Biggest purchase or
or
best
best
purchase?
purchase?
Best,
Yeah,
yeah, sorry,
something you're
best.
just
Yeah.
stoked
Okay.
about.
Hmm. I would have to say. There is a this is pretty funny. So there's a tantric teacher training residential training
Yeah.
in Sicily in Italy that me and my partner are planning to go to in September. So
Ah,
we've given our
sweet.
deposit for that. And so I would say that's something I'm excited about.
Oh, that's sweet.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, we'll have to hear about the course afterwards then,
Yeah, for
after the
sure.
experience. And then I guess lastly, a question, just to provide context and give thanks where it's due. Um, Bear with me, but imagine that you're at an awards kind of show and you're being handed a lifetime achievement award for all the work and all the contribution that you made to this planet while you were here. The question is, when that microphone comes up and says, "All right, doctor, who do you think? Who are the one, two, or three people that you think and why?"
That would deserve that
Yeah.
in terms of their broadest impact.
Well,
Um,
however, I mean, some people will say their
yeah.
wives, some people will say their parents, obviously the given answers, but is there anyone who just kind of comes to mind to say, I just want to acknowledge this person or these people who
I see
helped
what you're
who
asking.
helped me get to accomplish all these things and get recognized in this way?
Right. I'd probably start with my parents who always, they never tried to tell me what I should be or what I should do, and
That's
allow
huge.
me this total freedom to explore what I want to explore in the way I want to
Huge.
do it. And so I never felt any pressure that I need to be a particular profession or be a particular thing, really. I think that's what allowed me to just pursue my own path. I think that's a big one. And then in addition, I'd probably thank my current supervisor, Robin Carhart-Harris, who, is a world leader in the field and has
Mm,
been advocating and like speaking good for me about me on the internet for like 6 years
it's
now, even when I
huge.
was just, pretty young. And so that's really supported my visibility and credibility in the space as well. I
Wow.
think those are the two main ones, I
I
think.
love that. Well, Manish, I appreciate you taking the time with us to share all of your wisdom and your unique angles on looking at this. Everybody, we've been talking to Dr. Manesh Girn, the psychedelic scientist. Remember, there's only so many hours in a day, so let's use it for what matters most, and that is stop wasting them, but focus on the bottom line. Thanks, everybody.
Cool.
Thanks for listening to the Bottom Line Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.